welcome to the next chapter in information technology. Today we turn more into business, into commerce, and we discuss the basics of e-commerce. Let's start with some figures about e-commerce just to show that e-commerce is an important aspect of business today. In the upper left diagram, you can see the turnover of e-commerce in Germany. The figures are in billion euro, and what you can see, you have an increase during the past years. Roughly 1999, e-commerce started to grow, to pop up, and nowadays in 2022 we roughly will reach 100 billion euro in sales in Germany. Let's turn to the upper right diagram. Here you can see the percentage of e-commerce in comparison to the total commerce in Germany. And what you can see is that the figures are increasing. I haven't found figures which go up to today, but at least there is a similar figure when you turn to the diagram in the lower right corner. Here you can see again the comparison of e-commerce versus normal commerce versus total commerce, but you only have a look on the Xmas sale. But if you compare the figure of 2017, then you see it's roughly 12-13%, and that's the same what we have estimated in the upper figure. So if you conclude that these figures are basically the same, then you can see that meanwhile we have reached more than 20% of sale in e-commerce. Of course, the amount of sale depends on the branch you're in. If you turn to the lower left figure, then you can see different branches and the percentage of e-commerce in 2020 in Germany. And what you can see is, for example, that sport and camping or automotive is highly up. I guess automotive is, for example, due to the fact that more and more cars are sold through websites like mobile.de. But you can see as well that, for example, groceries, foods and the stuff is less than 1% in 2020. I guess that's basically the same with your own behavior, with your own buying behavior. Think about why you are going to order some products through the internet and you're hesitant when it comes to other products. So what is the goal for today? I would like to introduce the terms e-commerce and e-business so that you can see what is the same, what are the differences. You should be able to explain why e-commerce is successful, and you should know typical business models in e-commerce. Finally, to emphasize the influence of e-commerce, we will have a look on the 5 forces by Porter. In the coming 2 weeks, there will be 2 more chapters about e-commerce. The next week, we will have a look into analytics. That is, how you are tracked in the internet, how the big 4, Google, Amazon, Facebook and Apple, are creating profiles of you, and not only them. And the week after, we will have a look on e-commerce advertisements. That is display ads, AdWords in Google, search engine optimization and so on. The thing here is that in e-commerce you have very good possibilities to control what's going on. We have learned in the analytics chapter that we can trace and track each person coming into our web shop. And here you can see key figures like click-through rate, like conversion rate, and you can really work with these figures and try to improve your own shop. What is e-commerce and what is e-business? Are both terms the same? Depending on whom you talk to, there are different definitions of these 2 terms and how to distinguish between them. Thus, if you have discussions about e-commerce, better check what is really meant. Moreover, we have different ways to spell the term, to write the term. So you can find e-commerce with a dash, you can find e-commerce with a small e and a capital C, and vice versa. Taking the term literally, it means electronic commerce. But of course you can think, where does electronic commerce start? Is it sufficient that you take a non-mechanical cashier system and replace it by an electronic one, and then you have already e-commerce? Or does it require a web shop of its own? Again, the definitions of the borders of e-commerce depend on whom you talk to. Let's have a look on the definition by Lorden and Traver. According to them, e-business is internal, e-commerce is external. So if you have processes like warehousing or accounting, then we're talking about e-business, at least according to Lorden and Traver. However, if you have sales to a customer, or if you are negotiating with your providers, then this is e-commerce. The problem with this definition, with this differentiation, is that nowadays a lot of processes are integrated. So if you have a completely virtualized web shop and a customer buys a digital product using the online shop, all processes are triggered automatically. Warehousing and payment and accounting is all done automatically and triggered by this external process. So the borders between internal and external are getting somehow unclear. Meyer and Stormer are using another model to distinguish between e-business and e-commerce. Probably you have seen the table on the right side, or at least you heard about B2B or B2C marketing or transactions. What does it mean actually? So we have different participants in the market, which are called ABC. A stands for administration or governance, B are business or companies, and C are end customers. And then you have a service provider, which is the first letter, and then you have a receiver of a service, which is the third letter, and in between there is this 2, which simply means the service goes from the first letter to the second letter. So if you talk about B2B, then it means two companies are exchanging goods or services. If you talk about B2C, then, for example, you as an end customer are selling goods in, for example, Aldi or Edeka. If you have C to A, then actually we as a customer are giving services or products to the administration, to the governors. That's, for example, when we pay taxes. And C2C is, for example, when you go to eBay and there is a platform where end customers can exchange products in between. So now what has this to do with e-business and e-commerce? According to Meyer and Stormer, e-commerce is defined when you have either B2B or B2C. And then they introduce a new term, or they classify this term e-government. It's always when you have A at the very beginning. And e-business finally is everything. So in contrast to the former definition, e-business or e-commerce is a part of e-business. But there's more. We have the Enzyklopädie of Business Informatics in Germany, die Enzyklopädie der Wirtschaftsinformatik. E-commerce again is a part of business, but it's defined in a different way compared to the last definition. E-commerce just supports the process of selling, where e-business supports all kind of processes. Yeah, so we have highlighted it in the figures in that e-commerce is included in e-business. Again, think about what e-commerce means. Try to discuss, if you have a discussion about e-commerce, what exactly is the meaning of e-commerce and what are the borders to e-business and others. There is one more term. Maybe you have heard about M-commerce. M stands for mobile. M-commerce is always e-commerce, so M-commerce is a part of mobile commerce, and mobile stands for doing this kind of services using, for example, smartphones. In the first hand, it's really paying and buying things with a smartphone. On top, you can use things like localization services. So for example, when you're searching for a product and you can localize that a certain customer is looking for a product in the center of Aachen, then you can have advertisements which depend on this localization. So here mobile comes into the game, not only in the direct selling process. But why is e-commerce such a success? What are these new possibilities e-commerce is offering? In the next, you will see some of these terms which we have already discussed in the last chapter. But here we go again. The internet is 24/7, that is, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week open, and the internet is accessible, it's everywhere. For the commerce, this has consequences. The commerce overcomes traditional borders by having a traditional shop. You can overcome geography, so you don't have to travel anymore into the city or into a Walmart, and you don't have to respect opening times, so you can do shopping whenever you like. And moreover, you're not restricted to certain situations. You can do shopping while you're in a restaurant, while you're in a bus, or while you're doing and listening to a lecture. We're not longer talking about a marketplace. A marketplace is always limited to the borders of the shop. We're talking about market space, which somehow emphasizes that it's huge and large and has no borders. For the end user, the comfort increases. He or she doesn't have to travel anymore into the city. The transaction costs for both customer and retailer are decreased. Transaction costs? If you buy a jeans and the jeans is €100, then actually you're paying more than the €100. You have costs to travel in the city, you have to spend time for negotiation, you have to spend time and resources for contracting, for checking the quality, and so on and so on. And these transaction costs exist for both customer and retailer. These are the costs to participate in the market. And yes, transaction costs are decreased due to the internet, due to e-commerce. For retailers, new marketing channels are established. So if you have had a classical physical shop, you can now in addition sell goods through the internet. The potential market increases. Formerly, your customers have been mostly regional or local. Now you can sell products to whomever you want. For retailers, this means the costs to enter new markets decrease. If you have built up a web shop, for example, and you are hosted in Aachen at the very beginning, then you have actually no additional costs to sell books in Cologne or Munich or somewhere else. And new strategies for differentiation are enabled. So you as a shop provider, you could, for example, install regularly email newsletters for your customers, and by that you can differentiate from your competitors. Let's have a look on 24/7. Actually, I tried to find a web shop and was searching for the term opening times. But obviously, this question for opening times in web shops are so ridiculous that you don't find anything. Finally, I got at least at Zalando a hint that the telephone support is limited to age to 22. So in the end, it means it's so obvious that the internet is always open. Web shops are always online. It's not only the time, it's the global coverage. The internet is borderless. Significance for commerce. You can more easily overcome national and cultural borders. Often local adaptations are minimal or even not necessary. And the barriers to go into new markets once again decrease. Vice versa, the own market can increase. And by that you can have scaling effects. Let's have a look on the two websites. On the left side you can see a Greek website which offers products like olive oil into Germany. In the past, this producer of olive oil always had to use retailers, which of course would like to take a share of the profit. Now the producer can directly contact end customers in Germany and by that maybe have a higher profit. On the right side you can see that you can buy clothes directly from China. Taobao is something like a shop in China for the end users. One of the biggest web shops actually on earth. We have universal standards. The internet performs in the same way all over the world. Relevance for business. So if you have built up a web shop in Germany, let's say, then this workshop will work as well in all different countries. So it doesn't matter what kind of hardware is used, what kind of operation systems is used, what type of computer, tablet, smartphones is used, if the computer is old or new, it doesn't matter. So entry barriers into a new market are getting smaller. And even for a small company, small and medium-sized company, global strategies become possible. At least you're no longer hindered by different kind of technologies. Richness and density of information, that's a traditional conflict in marketing. So if you have a look at marketing, then you have these problems. Either you have a good reach, that means you meet many people, or you have a high richness, so you have a very individualized message to the customer. Let's take two examples. If you have a TV ad, for example, during a football game, then you have just a small slogan, "Our beer is the best," which is not very rich in information. However, you reach very many people. On the contrast, you can have an individual talk to a single person in a store. Here you have a high richness, you can interact with the person, with the customer. However, you're reaching simply one person only. Now, e-marketing is overcoming this problem. Doing e-marketing, if you have installed and if you have done analytics, which we will discuss the next week, you can create profiles for small segments, maybe even for individual persons. And based on these profiles, you can create automatically individual messages for each and every person. So the richness gets higher. Maybe it's not as rich as an individual talk, but on the other hand, you're reaching many people, and that's all automatically done. The internet and e-commerce is interactive. So this enables bidirectional communication. Why is this relevant for business? Customers can be integrated into a dialogue. Often they are the driving forces in the communication. So for example, if you have evaluations at Amazon's or blogs about products, you can see that some customers are really engaged. And if they cannot be engaged, they feel frustrated and leave to other jobs. So whenever you have a web shop, you should open up channels for communication in both directions. By that, it is possible to identify and understand the wishes and the requirements by customers. And in addition, these kind of evaluations by other customers, the number of thumbs up or the number of 5 points you have reached, these are an important evaluation for other customers if they trust in your shop or not. And moreover, using bidirectional communication, the relationship to the customer can be established or stabilized. This reduces the risk to lose customers to competitors or the risk to lose customers for substitutes. We will discuss this later when we discuss the 5 forces by Porter. A simple example of this bidirectional communication is this chance to give reviews in Amazon. I guess you have seen it before, and even if this is now, let's say, German evaluations, you know what I'm talking about. You can see how many 5-star evaluation you have, and as a customer who might be interested in a product, you can go through these written evaluations and check the 5-star ones or the 1-star ones. E-commerce established the possibility to customize products. What you can see here is a web page by Adidas, and you can see that I have created my own version of this Stan Smith shoe. So you can see my name, first name, last name in a Brazilian style on my shoes. Why is this important? Again, it's about engagement of the customers. You can have engagement not only by this communication as we discussed above, but for example by letting them doing layouts and customized products. Then customers stay longer on your website, customers are interested what other customers have done, and you can maybe ask for higher prices because of course this is some kind of individualization which takes an extra effort in your company as well. But customers are willing to pay for it. And you combine it with social networking. So people can hand in their layout and let it be evaluated by other customers. So here you can see it's not my evaluation, but somebody got 4.7 points out of more than 2,500 evaluations. So we talked about Web 2.0 and these aspects of not only reading only, but participating in communication. This is an important aspect not only of social networks, but of customer and e-commerce as well. And to combine social networks with e-commerce is important, or to establish social network ideas in e-commerce, that's another important issue. What else is changed if you compare digital markets with traditional markets? In the following table you see 3 columns. The middle column describes digital markets, the right one describes traditional markets, and on the left side basically you have a heading for each row, and each row describes one aspect where especially these markets are different. The first one is information asymmetry. So what does it mean? Information asymmetry means that usually, especially in traditional markets, the retailer has more knowledge, has a higher knowledge compared to the customer. So the customer simply has to believe what the retailer is arguing all about. In digital markets, customers are much better informed. You can compare prices, you can have a look at evaluations by other customers and so on. So you have much more knowledge, you are much more empowered as a customer in digital markets. The asymmetry is reduced. Have a look for search costs. So if you are looking, for example, for the right trouser, then you can go in traditional markets, but you have to go from shop to shop, which simply takes time. In the digital world, you simply can click through different shops or click in one shop through 1,000 different models of a trouser, and you are a little bit faster. Of course, there's an argument that when it comes to a trouser, the look and feel is a little bit better as in traditional markets. But in principle, search costs are lower in digital markets. We talked about transaction costs briefly already. And again, in digital markets, these are lower compared to traditional markets. There is a nice term, delayed gratification. And actually, here traditional markets are usually better. Delayed gratification means if you buy something, when do you get the product? And if you're going into a traditional market, you usually directly have the product. Whereas in a digital market, you have to wait until the parcel with the product is delivered. Of course, that's not true if you're talking about digital products like a digital ticket or an MP4 in Netflix or some music in Spotify. Dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing means prices can quickly go up and down. You can see it nowadays on gas stations. So in digital markets, that's actually quite easy. You simply have a database and each product has a price, and if you change the price over there, then when a customer drops into your shop, the new price is simply shown. It's actually instant. In a usual shop, it might be a little bit more tricky. So if you, for example, go to Aldi, then you can see that you have to change all these paper-based informations where the price is on. And then you have to change it at the same time in the computer-based cashier systems. If you have individual prices attached to each product, it even takes a longer time. So setting up prices, changing prices is a little bit critical or takes more effort in traditional markets. The next term is quite similar, price discrimination. However, it's not about going up and down with prices in time, but to go up and down with prices depending on the customer. One prominent example is the following, that sometimes users of Apple devices have to pay more. So logic is quite simple. If somebody has an iPhone or a MacBook, then he is willing to pay more compared to other people. So why not try to offer him a higher price, and maybe he's willing to pay. In the internet, it's actually quite easy. If you access a web shop, you do not hand only your IP address to this web shop, but as well a string which contains the device which you are using. So the web owner simply knows what kind of device you are having. And depending on that, he can change the price and offer you a different price if you have an iPhone. Think about how you can do this in traditional markets. Of course, price discrimination can not only be done using, for example, iPhones versus Android phones. It could, of course, be done that maybe men have to pay a higher price compared to women, things like that. But again, to profile the people accordingly is more tricky in traditional markets. Market segmentation. Usually it's quite easy to do in digital markets. We will talk about profiling the next week. And yes, in the end, you're able to do profiles, meaning segments which are going down to one person. In traditional markets, this is quite an effort, and usually you don't get to an individual level. So less precision, but higher costs. What about network effects? A network effect can be described by, for example, a telephone. The first user of a telephone doesn't really profit from it. Why? He cannot call anybody because he's the only one, he's the first one who has a telephone. The more people buy a telephone, the better it is for everybody. This is what is called a network effect. The more people are going into something, the better it is for it all. And these network effects are relatively high, they're strong in digital markets. So you can see it, for example, in Amazon. Amazon seems to be trustworthy because there are so many people in there. And you can see it as well in the number of evaluations. If you would like to get start, for example, a pizza delivery, then it's hard to get it running because you do not have any kind of recommendations or evaluations. So the first thing you have to go for is to try to get evaluations, some 5 stars on your website. These effects are weaker in traditional markets. The last effect we're talking about is disintermediation. Disintermediation means you have a producer, then you have, let's say, several levels of retailers in between, and at the end you have the end customer. Think about this producer of olive oil in Greece. In the past, you always had to go to the retailer who sold it to a next retailer and so on, and finally you can buy the olive oil, for example, at Aldi. Of course, each retailer would like to have profit because he's offering some service. Disintermediation now means to overcome the retailers, that the producer is directly selling to the end customer. As we have lower market entries, and as a small and medium enterprise, the possibility to anyhow work globally, this disintermediation is easily possible. In traditional markets, it's hardly possible in some situations. There's another table. Now we're discussing digital goods versus traditional goods. So what is a digital good? Actually, it's bits and bytes, it's ones and zeros. So an example could be an MP4 file which you get from Netflix. It could be a song you download by Spotify. It could be a ticket you're buying for the next train travel or airplane travel or something like that. An ebook. So, and traditional goods are real goods. They're composed of some material, they're tangible, you can touch them. And again, we have a comparison where we have digital goods in the second column and traditional goods in the third column. And in the first column, we have those aspects and perspectives I would like to discuss. Let's first take the marginal costs per unit. So if you produce something, then the more copies of it you produce, the cheaper it gets. That's true for digital goods and for digital goods. However, when it comes to the traditional goods, even to copy something takes time and takes material. So you have some marginal costs which are greater than zero. However, when you have digital goods, copying costs nothing. You don't even have to store things like that because you just make a copy once a product is bought and then you send it over the internet. The cost of initial production might be higher for digital goods. For example, if a book is written, then to produce it and then to get a digital copy out of it is maybe higher. The traditional good could be a little bit lower. However, this high is always relative to the copying. Again, copying costs and marginal costs, there is the same argument. It's close to zero or even zero when you have digital goods, and traditional goods, it's greater than zero. Delivery costs are, again, easy, low. When it comes to digital goods, they're close to zero. So if a company has a flat rate, and if you do have a flat rate for your internet, actually you don't pay anything on top. For traditional good could be higher. So simply somebody has to pay the parcel services. Inventory costs again are low. Why? You just have to store one copy, and actually the memory costs in a computer are really, really low. In the traditional goods, of course, it's higher because you simply have to reserve space in a warehouse. Marketing costs are variable. Yeah, so if you have digital goods, it depends on the product, how you can do marketing in the best way. So it's hard to discuss which is better or easier or has a higher price compared to the traditional goods. But again, pricing is more easy. For example, you can bundle products. You can choose a random product. You can do pricing games and offer digital goods on its top. That's much more complicated when it comes to traditional goods. Often the price is fixed and it's often based on the unit costs. So digital goods have some advantages when it comes to copying, delivering, and so on and so on. There are different ways to do e-commerce. Maybe you're thinking about a retailer only if you think about e-commerce. So somebody who has an internet shop and is buying products from producer and selling it to customers for a higher price. Traditional retailer. Amazon has started that way. They started with traditional products like books and clothes, and of course they had to pay their providers and had to try to get a higher price from the customers. That's how life works. But Amazon is having different offerings. Amazon does not only sell products by itself, but Amazon is offering a marketplace to others. What does that mean? Amazon has a really good infrastructure, both when it comes to the electronic infrastructure, so the web shops and so on, but also these warehousing and delivering capacities and so on. And this infrastructure can be used by others. Let's give an example. A friend of mine had the idea to sell things like police issues from the US. So a police star, a police hat and something like that. You can buy those things in the US in some shops. And of course the idea was it's not really good enough to sell it regionally because there is not enough market share here in Aachen. So he wanted to sell it over the internet. But opening up an own shop and taking care for all these handling of products and fulfillment, was not his idea. So he took the offer by Amazon Marketplace and he shipped just the parcels he got from the US directly to the Amazon warehouse, and he defined a price and the rest was done by Amazon. So they offered the product on their web pages. They handled this fulfillment. So if there was a person who bought something, they shipped the parcel, they did the payment, and so on and so on. Of course, they take a share. However, the risk for going into a market is much lower compared to what you have to do if you do it by yourself. Even if you do only a web shop, you have to somehow have a warehousing where you can store all the products you would like to sell later on. The investment to start a business really gets lower. And maybe even in the long run, you're arguing, I'm focusing on product management, on defining new products, to get new products, but these handling of products and customers, that I will let do Amazon or some other provider. Another way is iTunes. iTunes it's a shop by Apple, and they sell movies and songs. The thing here is they only have digital products, so they don't have to care about parcels, something like that. eBay is offering a marketplace as well. However, it's first aiming for non-professionals, so it's a C2C market. Each and everybody can sell products there to each and everybody. But it's more than selling. Maybe you know platforms like billiger.de, where you have comparison of prices or comparison of products. Here, usually you cannot buy things directly, but you're forwarded to recommended web shops. And of course, this forwarding somehow is provisioned by these shops. And there's special portals, for example, in the travel business sector. You have Expedia, Opodo, Airbnb, Uber, and so on, who simply try to act as a broker and bring together customers and providers. And of course, they always take some transaction costs for their help. So what you can see here is there is different ways to do e-commerce. Being a retailer in a web shop is just one single option here. Let's have a more systematic view on what we have just seen on different options in e-commerce. Let's first discuss different revenue models, that means how you make money, and later on some business models. The first model, revenue model, is sale or retail. So you have products and you get these products from a producer, you have to pay for it, and you sell those products later on. The same is true for information or service. Usually you are paid per product then. Another way to get revenue is an abonnement or subscription. So you get, for example, periodic payment for news or TV or music. So if you have Spotify or you have any newspaper, then this is typically what you're after. If you're not having a flat rate, but you pay per transaction, then the revenue model is provision. For example, the eBay marketplace or Amazon marketplace usually works like that. They take some share for each transaction you're doing. They do not have flat rates. Sometimes you do not get a transaction, but you get payment indirectly by advertisements. You're offering some interesting content, for example in the newspapers, and people are going to your newspapers and simply can read it for free. However, they have to suffer from advertisements, and these advertisements are then paid by those who would like to place a product. And the final revenue model would be a partnership. So sometimes you do not get a provision and you're not paid by advertisement, but you are paid by some big provider of some kind of product, and you get some regular money, not per transaction, but simply like that. Then you have a partnership. Now let's have a look on business models. They always rely on some kind of revenue model, but there are different ways to organize your business even if you have the same revenue model. In here we have only the revenue model sale, but still the business model when it comes to e-commerce is different. We have something which is called virtual retail. So it's basically only the online version of a classical retailer. Amazon or iTunes are example for this. There is no Amazon shop where you can walk in. However, there is only this virtual shop. For other companies like MediaMarkt and IKEA, this is different. They do have a traditional shop where you can walk in. However, when they go into e-commerce, they offer an additional distribution channel. And there are other old players like Otto, Konrad Manufaktum. They have been catalog based. They're going back actually to the 50s or even longer. This catalog nowadays, not sure if those exist anymore, but this catalog you can find in a virtual way still in the internet. So what they have done is virtualization of a classical catalog. And finally, you have producers who doing the direct selling to the end customer. Have you ever seen a computer, a laptop of Dell, for example, when you walk through Multimedia Markt or Saturn? Probably not, because Dell is directly selling only to the customer. So here you have this disintermediation as a part of this business model. There are other business models. And sometimes you can see that the revenue, that they are using different revenue models. You could be a community provider. This is, for example, the case for social networks like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and so on. These social networks are usually for free. However, they have ads where lots of people have to pay for, or they're doing partnerships. Then you have content providers. For example, you can watch Champions League in Sky, or you can't. You can watch Champions League in the Zone. You can have a look in the newspaper of the Aachener Zeitung, or you have Netflix videos. It's all about information and or entertainment. And the revenue model typically is ads and or subscription. Maybe you have followed the discussion that Netflix is no longer happy with their subscriptions only and think about changing their business model and offering ads in addition. So you can have a high subscription without ad or a low subscription fee and you have to suffer from ads then. Then there are portals. They're not offering really content, but they're somehow organizing links to other contents. And there's different forms of portals. Some are horizontal, which means they offer content from each and every aspect. So typical examples are web.de or gmx.de. So it's about universal information. And again, the revenue models are typically ads, subscription or provision. Then you have vertical models like Kinox.to, which are specialized services on products, here in this case for movies, maybe or probably illegal. But still, it's a vertical product. It's a vertical platform. And finally, you have search engines like Google or Bing, and again, they work with ads and partnerships. And there is a last table. You have transaction brokers which usually rely on a provision. Expedia, Monster, Uber are typical examples of those. Then you have marketplaces. We discussed already eBay or Amazon. A German competitor to Amazon is Mein-Paket, and in B2B it's Alibaba in China. And finally you have service providers like Visa Now, which help you to get the visa, for example, to China, or Smart Steuer, which helps you to do your tax declarations. So it's not only about physical products, it's about services as well. Finally, let's take another model to describe how e-commerce influences the market. There is this famous 5 forces by Porter. In Germany it's called Branchenstrukturanalyse. So what it is all about? You and your company are basically in the middle and you are facing 5 forces. Within your branch, within your market, you probably have some competitors. That is called competitive rivalry. So the question is here, the number of competitors, what are the quality differences, and so on and so on. Of course, there is a threat, there is another force, which could be another competitor which is not yet in the branch, which is not in your market. So this is a threat of new entry. For example, if you have a bookstore, there could come, let's say, some other bookstore from the outside and try to be placed in Aachen. There is a threat of substitution, and it's sometimes hard to understand and depends on what is your product. So if you have a bookstore, then a substitution could be that somebody pops up with an e-book. Yeah, it's a substitution for a classical book based on paper. However, if you define as a bookstore your product as some kind of entertainment, then even Netflix could be a substitution. So it always depends on what you're discussing about, what your product is, how you define your product, how your threat of substitution could be described. Then you have the buyer power. The buyer in your shops, your customers, they can decide if they go to you. Yeah, they can try to bargain about prices, and they have maybe the argument they could go to a competitor. And on the other hand, you have your suppliers. And again, these suppliers would like to get the best prices and so on, and they have some kind of bargaining power as well. So basically, this model is well established and simply describes forces in a market you as a offer of services and products have to deal with. Now the question is, what does change if e-commerce gets into the game? So again, I have simplified the pictures. You can see the industry, the branch with rivalry in the middle. You have the bargaining power of suppliers from the top, the bargaining powers of the buyers from the bottom, and threat of substitutes and the threat of new entrants from the left and the right. How is now e-commerce changing these kind of threats? So when discussing threat of new entrants, then we already have seen that entry barriers into the markets are getting smaller. So you have maybe to take special care because of e-commerce. Due to the fact that we have lots of electronic substitutes like e-books, audio streams, video streams, the virtualization in the world leads to a lot of substitutes. And as the offerer of products and services, you have simply to deal with it. Supplier can bypass retailer and sell products directly to the customer. So if you're doing a retailer job, then maybe this disintermediation is a risk for you. The existing market could get bigger, which means more rivalry. Competitors can head for new positions. However, for you it means you have a bigger market as well. You could be a new entrant into a new market, some place where you have not been offering your services before. And finally, customer can easily research prices, can buy over internet. They're no longer dependent on the region. These information asymmetry is really some argument for the buyers. The examples I have given in here are maybe pointing to a direction that the rivalry and the powers of the others are getting bigger. But the own possibilities are getting bigger as well. So there's lots of options to counterattack these changes in here. The main issue is, if you have a model like that with the 5 powers, you can easily go through it and see effects if you introduce e-commerce. So the main thing you should think about is, yes, e-commerce simply changes the situation we have had before we have had e-commerce.